the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
We can get to the college.
We're gonna go big noon kickoff. What are you thinking?
Well, can you let the good folks know what you mean? Because a lot of folks, when they think game of the week and they think of like a big time atmosphere, they think University of Tennessee, they think LSU, they think Texas A&M, they think when Florida or South Carolina when they're up. So I'm just kind of confused as to who we're talking about. So if you could clarify for the good folks which atmosphere we're talking about on Saturday, because I haven't heard. Has Kirby reminded Georgia fans that they're supposed to be loud at Georgia games this week? Has that had to come up to get ready for this top 10 matchup, or is that just he's not worried about Ole Miss, so he doesn't feel the need for the good folks to get loud once again inside Sanford Stadium?
Shots fired over there. I guess Eric Ainge taught you Tennessee people nothing a year ago. Still questioning.
We get you at home this year. Tennessee hasn't lost a home game since Georgia in 2021.
Since last time Georgia came. That's right. Just remember that. So Ole Miss coming in to Georgia, home field advantage. You better believe it, sir. 92,000 is going to be rocking. But yeah, college game day, game of the week. Pat McAfee and the gang is going to be on campus. Who knows what he'll do next? But Georgia comes in 10.5 points. I think this is down to 10.5, right? So it was a little bit higher earlier in the week. How do you see this game going?
So here's the thing. I've gone back and forth in this a little bit. I think early in the week it was fun to think about, hey, Ole Miss, big game for Lane Kiffin. He got the monkey off his back of winning a big SEC game against a top 10 team. He beat LSU in that really, really fun game from a few weeks back. Big win for Ole Miss in this program. Trey Harris has been great for them. Quinshon Judkins, you have Jaxson Dart. Like, you have dudes all over this offense for Georgia. And what we've talked about in the past is like the only way when you look at Kirby's history at Georgia, the only teams that can really threaten Georgia and give them a lot of problems are the elite SEC quarterbacks, or really just any elite quarterbacks altogether. Like CJ Stroud had a really good playoff game against Kirby and company, and now he's looking like an NFL MVP candidate right out of the gate for the Houston Texans. So there's something to be said about it taking some really top tier Heisman level quarterback play to beat Kirby Smart, and Brady Cook found that out. He struggled late in that game. Obviously, the pick late against Georgia. You just have to be damn near perfect to beat this Georgia team, and you have to have an elite quarterback, I think. And maybe that's the thing that kind of worries most Tennessee fans this year with Milton and company, but he is completing nearly 80% of his passes at the moment. But Matt Green, I think this is just going to be a fun battle between Dart and Beck, because I think Georgia's pass rush is not what it was the last 2 years. I think it's good. It's not great. I think it's good, or I shouldn't say not great. You can say it's great. It's not elite. It's not like, oh, what are we doing with Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and company up front? It's not that level of dominance. The dominance is really more on the back end for me, with Tyke Smith, with Malachi Starks, with Kamari Lassiter. They have a lot of dudes in that secondary, and they move around, and I think that's the most intimidating part of this Georgia team on the defensive side this year. So I think I'm really curious to see how Dart handles that by and large, because I think Ole Miss, you could say, is just more of like a souped up Mizzou team that went in there last year and took them the distance. So I think no matter what, I think this is going to be a very close game. I think it's going to be more high scoring than what we saw last week with Mizzou. I think Ole Miss is more complete on the offensive side of the ball, more top end talent than Missouri as a whole. I also just think Beck is going to deal. Is something that I've thought about a lot. Is I think Carson Beck's going to have a really, really good game. Maybe this is Carson Beck's. I could see this being his best, most memorable game for Georgia this fall. Is getting up for this one, last home game of the year. A lot to prove. We'll see if he comes back next year. I think that's still up in the air. We'll see what kind of grade he gets from NFL scouts going into next year. But I think this is a sneaky important game for him. And he obviously is going up against a super talented kid in Jaxson Dart. I think he's going to have a big day. And my gut tells me I'm talking 400 yards. I think this is a bad Pete Golding type game. I saw Bud Elliott talking about how the Ole Miss defense success over the last couple weeks is more of a mirage. and that this Ole Miss team maybe might be a little overrated on the defensive front right now. But remember, Ole Miss only scored 10 points against Alabama a few weeks back, and this Georgia team has more talent than that Alabama defense as a whole. But both two extremely talented defenses that can put the clamps on folks, especially at home. We'll see if Brock Bowers comes back in this one. My guess is because it's so early that if you do see Brock, it's more of like those gadget, like kind of a decoy type things. I would be surprised if he's a heavily involved guy this soon after the surgery, and also just with the experience and seeing what Cedric Tillman was like after. I have a hard time believing he's just going to be force-fed and be a significant part of the game plan this week. But maybe Brock Bowers is built different in a lot of ways, so maybe he is going to be back to who he was right away. But I don't know. I think with all that being said, my gut tells me not only does Georgia win, I think this might be a statement game. I think Georgia might be down early. It might be a South Carolina situation from early in the year with Spencer Rattler cooking a little bit in the first half against Georgia, and then Georgia putting the clamps, because Georgia in the second half is just a different animal. They come out and Kirby makes adjustments better than anyone in the country in the second half, outside of maybe Nick Saban and what Alabama's done too this year. I am going to say Georgia 42, Alabama, Ole Miss 28. So I think Georgia actually wins and covers, but I would not be surprised if it's 28-21 Ole Miss at the half.
Yeah, speaking of Carson Beck, he's the only quarterback in the history of the SEC to throw for 250 plus yards in each of his first 9 starts of his career. So I think it was like the first 7 starts he was the first one to do, but he's just kept that going. So yeah. I think Beck, you look at Ole Miss's defense, like they're 11th in the SEC, I think 61st in the country in terms of total defense. Like that's ranked behind Kentucky, Missouri, and Florida, and that's after those teams played Georgia and hung 500-600 yards on them. So I think there's a good chance that Georgia's offense kind of goes off in this one. I think this game does have some blowout potential, kind of because like how you saw with Billy Napier going for that reckless 4th down early in the game. Like Lane Kiffin is going to be, going for 4th downs and all this. Like Georgia's the number 5 team in the country on 3rd down in general. Georgia's number 5 team in the country on 3rd down defensively, and number 1 in the country on 3rd down offensively. So like that's a pretty huge stat, especially for a guy like Lane Kiffin, who is going to want to go for it on 4th down a lot. Like I think that could set up a potential going for it on his own 40-yard line in the first quarter, and this thing could potentially get away from Ole Miss or something. So I think like you said, this Missouri team kept this game close for 4 quarters a week ago. And Ole Miss, they're built very similar to that Missouri team. Like Cody Schrader does lead the SEC in rushing, but I think we'd all probably take Quinshon Judkins. He hasn't been 100% healthy this whole year, but and then Jaxson Dart, I guess he's better than Brady Cook. I was kind of debating that myself. I think he's a better athlete than Brady Cook, but they are also pretty similar players in their own right. So I think this game, if Ole Miss is able to run the ball, and that's where Georgia's been, they are still one of the best in the SEC. Like we judge them at like a different standard, but that's where they've been susceptible at times this year, and they basically haven't been the last few years. But one thing that's interesting about their pass rush, I think Jake Rowe mentioned this on Dogs for On 3, and he was talking about, I think a year ago, Georgia had like 8 sacks in the first 7 games of the season. And then in the first like 8 games of the season, in the last 7 games, they had like 28 sacks or something like that. It kind of feels like when Georgia needs to get pressure on the quarterback, they do. It's kind of like Kirby, they do what they need to do on defense. And it's like they're giving up. They're not the havoc creating team like they have been, and maybe these last couple years, but this is still maybe the best defense in the SEC. I think statistically they are the best defense in the SEC. So it's hard for me to see Ole Miss, doing much more than Missouri. Like I kind of think I'm kind of with you. I think this thing could get a little out of hand. I'm going to say 38-17. I think Georgia does kind of make a statement in this one. Georgia is 10-0 against ranked teams in Sanford Stadium since 2017. So like this team's basically been unbeatable in the big game atmosphere in Sanford Stadium in the last, how many is that, 6 years. So I think Ole Miss, like you said, Alabama is definitely the most comparable team to Georgia that they're going to play all season. And they only scored 10 points on that Alabama, and it was on the road as well. So they only were able to get 10 points on Alabama. It's hard for me to see them getting any more than 20 on Georgia. And I just don't think I think this Georgia offense is significantly more dangerous than Alabama, especially Alabama in week 3 or week 4 when Ole Miss played them. Like Alabama offense was not firing on all cylinders at that point. So I think this Georgia offense is, behind LSU, probably the next best in the conference. And you saw what LSU did. They won a crazy shootout. I think Georgia's going to get a few more stops than LSU. So, yeah, give me Georgia 38-17.
I like it. Where are we going next, Matt Green?
This is up to you. You want to go with your squad or you want to go with Big Noon or to start our Saturday?
We can go ahead and we should probably always knock out our teams first. All right,
let's go to that 3:30 CBS slot.